I would like to welcome everyone to our annual Sergio Lecture this evening. The Sergio Lecture series was begun in 1994 and has been funded throughout these years by Chris Sergio and his family. Chris graduated from Cranbrook School for Boys in 1983. An outstanding scholar and athlete, Chris went on to Duke University and then to Europe, where he lived and worked until recently when he returned to the States from Switzerland. Our speaker tonight, Tod Williams, is also an alum of the school, having graduated from Cranbrook School for Boys in 1961. It is a distinct pleasure to welcome him here tonight to speak in the deSalle Auditorium at the Cranbrook Art Museum. In keeping with our tradition at the school, Tod will be introduced by one of our students, Ariana Sauber, a senior boarding student from Ann Arbor. Would you welcome, please, Ariana Sauber.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ariana Sauber, and I'm a senior here at Cranbrook Kingswood. Tonight, we get a chance to hear from a very special man, a man who's an architect. He's a distinguished Cranbrook alum, and he has had so much influence in the world in the last several decades. Tod Williams graduated from Cranbrook School for Boys in 1961. He attended Princeton University, earning a BA in 1965. After a year in Cambridge, England, Tod returned to Princeton for an MFA degree in architecture in 1967. After a 6-year stint with the architecture firm Richard Meier and Associates, Tod struck out on his own. In 1986, Tod Williams and Billy Chen, longtime colleagues, were married and together established a studio on Central Park South, where they still work today. Currently, Tod Williams, Billy Chen and Associates is a 28-person firm that specializes in designing buildings for institutions that value issues of aspiration and meaning, timelessness and beauty. They design buildings that are exquisitely made and useful in ways that speak to both efficiency and the spirit. Matter, light, texture, detail, and most of all, experience are the essence of Williams and Chen's architecture. A great many of the buildings they have built together have received international recognition. Some examples are the American Folk Art Museum in New York City, the Neurosciences Institute in La Jolla, California, Hereford College at the University of Virginia, the Asia Society Center in Hong Kong, the Phoenix Art Museum in Arizona, and most recently, the Barnes Foundation in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, which has been widely reviewed and admired for its solution to a challenging problem. The list of individual, firm, and project awards include the Thomas Jefferson Medal in Architecture, the Architectural League of New York President's Medal, and an election to the American Academy of Arts and Letters. And he was also part of Newsweek's 100 People Who Will Influence American Culture and Politics into the Next Millennium. So, to be honest, I hadn't read Tod Williams until this morning, actually, and I'd always read about him in Architectural Digest. But in fact, I realized that I think I'd felt his presence in a different way here at Cranbrook in our very own Williams Auditorium that he designed in 1999. So when I first came to Cranbrook as a freshman in the fall of 2009, I decided to join the swim team. Now, all of my life, I have enjoyed being in water immensely. I spent my childhood swimming in the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, in the Caribbean, and even as far as the Shahbazi Hotel in Isfahan, Iran. So I've swum in many different places during my life so far, but Williams Auditorium is truly something else. I spent my first few months at this school much more in the swimming pool than in the academic buildings. This pool is seriously a pool like no other, and even though swimming is an incredibly demanding sport, physically and mentally, requiring loads of discipline, I came to enjoy it due to the atmosphere of Williams Natatorium, and I don't think I would have made it through an entire 2 seasons of swimming had it not been for the pool. Williams Natatorium is a glorious escape from the everyday life of being a Cranbrook student. The modern look attracted me, and once I dove into the clear, chlorine-filled water, I could hear nothing except my own breath, and then the grueling, repetitive laps would follow. But the natatorium made me feel really calm and close with nature. I especially loved to swim backstroke because then I could float on my back and gaze way up at the star-like lights in the dark blue ceiling that resembled a starry night sky, and I liked to gaze up at the large oculi that revealed natural light and clouds. It didn't feel like a man-made, confining facility in which swim teams typically train in, but instead a fluid, sophisticated, natural place where one felt quite important. And I think just as teachers touch each one of their students' lives, I think architects touch each of the people who enter their buildings, their lives. And that's what Tod Williams did to me. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Mr. Tod Williams.
I guess you can see she's something else. Wow. Gee whiz. Beautiful. Thank you, Ariana. That's really great. Billy Chen isn't here. You know, a number of people asked about her, and certainly she's my better half, and Ariana mentioned her, but everything is done together with Billy. But tonight she's not with us. We teach at Yale, and she needed to teach, and we've been traveling a great deal, so I let her off the hook, given that I was the one that went here in 1961 in the boys' school. I'd like to go quickly through several projects, and I'm going to, in fact, well, let's see, how does the images come up? Oh, this, you've got extraordinary. We called this, I want to call this extraordinary. Ordinary is the soil in our hands, and the thing that locks our buildings to Mother Earth. And I think that we have to recognize that architecture is always a service, and that there's something humbling and grounding about making buildings and making them marks on the earth. And I wanted to show this. And if you do that work well and do it beautifully, it can also become extra. And eventually, perhaps, something can become extraordinary. I'm not pretending that our work does this, but it's our ambition to begin from the ordinary and then to see what additional dimension we can add, always grounded. I'm going to show briefly where we live, our home, Carnegie Hall, and our studio. Our home at Carnegie Hall lived there. As I said this morning, I talked to the students and said, after leaving here, I thought the only moral thing I could do after leaving Princeton was to move to New York and live there in a very small place, but close to the center of the city. And I did. And I lived in the top floor of Carnegie Hall, up there on the upper left. If this works, I don't know. It's pointing this way. In this small space up here, the tower, for 35 years, 36 years until a few years ago when we left. But this building plays another role because having lived there for 35 years, it really affected my life. I loved the community of arts that were packed around the main hall. I loved being in the center of the world as I knew it. And this photograph was taken of Billy and me just days before we left our studio. We were eventually evicted, as everyone, from Carnegie Hall. It was a tiny place, and you can see simply how small it at one time was our studio and our home, and we lived there modestly with our objects for these many years. I did a drawing of the plan of this, and you can see in this plan that these elevators didn't come up to that floor. They stopped below, and you walked up a fire stair to get to our level, take off our shoes here, step in, leave my bike here, and this was the space we just saw. So it was a very small life in a very, very central place. And I loved every detail and every moment of that, but we had to leave. The objects that we collect as many objects as we do books, and they are as meaningful to us as books are. This too will come to play another part in the story as we move on. But it's a part of the special love for art and architecture that Billy and I have, and for the ordinary, the boat I made with my son, Kai, many, many years ago here, as the Cache Sex, which we've got here, as a Roxy Payne drip drawing that we have there. So everything is important. The studio is, in fact, these people. You can see the two of us, much older than the rest of them. And we all work in one room. And the room feels very much like our home, which is just a few feet away. But I want to show them because they're collaborators in our work and they're as critical to the work as we are. I'm going to show 4 or 5 projects. The first one is in Bennington. The first one is here at Cranbrook. Gosh, I didn't recognize it. The natatorium. But I'm going to move very quickly through this. I thought I should posit it just simply to let you know why the natatorium was not air-conditioned and why we designed it this way. It really was because we had done several pools before and they were all air-conditioned to be dehumidified. And having spent those many years on this campus, I believe that the natural beauty and the natural resources in the land and the way buildings fit into the land were absolutely crucial to making the act of swimming one that was sensual as well as competitive. So we convinced the school that they should make a building that was not conditioned but had apertures to open and allow the building to be naturally ventilated. So even though the pool may be chlorine filled, the atmosphere around would smell of the woods. Early models, the building as you know it. The long blue wall, our idea that buildings, to wherever possible, should try to slide into a landscape and not dominate them. So the image of the building is largely the image of a wall. And the surprise, of course, occurs when you enter into the building and you see the space and eventually the building opens up. And you've all been there. But I'm particularly pleased when I see the building disappearing behind into the woods. It's a very big footprint. And there's plenty of beautiful buildings around this campus, and this is really about a beautiful interior. And I want our work primarily to be about the beauty of the interior experience rather than the exterior experience. After all, it's really what we have as humans to offer is our interiors. And after all, this is where we live our lives. So the next project is in Bennington College, and this was finished this last year. Maybe some of you know Bennington College, but it's really in the rural Vermont. This is the campus, 70-year-old campus. This is their visual and performing arts center, and they wanted a place where students at Bennington could meet people from the outside world and where students from Bennington go out to affect change in the world. It's a series of seminar spaces for meetings that will work throughout the whole campus, but it's also a residence to bring visitors to the campus. This is the adjacent landscape. Here we are on the site, a rather open site, once in the fields, as you can see, us standing on what would be the buildings. This is the complex. So this is a residence block. This is a seminar classroom block. This is a small building we call the Lens. Each of the buildings actually has an inverted roof. It collects water and snow and drops it into a center space, which is then melted and then returned to the adjacent pond. The plans. There are 2 unusual seminar spaces. This one is an outdoor space, and with the proper sun and stilling the winds that are there, one can meet there virtually every day of the year. And then this is an indoor seminar space, and both of them are essentially offline. The rest are relatively normal. These are studios for students to work on their projects 24/7. A large seminar space for up to 100 people, and then the residences, each of which is different. I think you'll see as we look at the buildings, one of the things we did is we decided that the buildings should be made of local stone. We found that a quarry had been abandoned in Rutland, Vermont, a great quarry at one time, and that stone was strewn across the landscape here when we first came upon it. And we decided we'd use that stone. It was very much like the stone in front of the local church. 200 years ago, when people made buildings of marble from Vermont, they used every piece of the stone, and we wanted to use every piece of the rubble we found on the site. So we eventually laid out the facades made of these marble pieces that would be, basically, they were dry laid in a space so they could be dried and numbered, and then were put up efficiently on the building as cladding. They came from actually 6 different quarries because the blocks had been dumped essentially on the site, and we didn't mind that we would be putting together different kinds of marble to create a single kind of collage. When it's dry outside, the building is almost white. against the green landscape. And of course, when it's snowing, it disappears. The cornices of the buildings are all the same. You can see that we have occasional large rocks that we call, that are markers, especially large to mark an entrance, for example, and boulders that we found on the site. The seminar space is made of walnut and with fabric that is there to absorb the sound, reflect sound. You can look out of that seminar space and watch students passing by or close them off with curtains. The residence is but 3 feet away, but completely obscured from the position of the students. Narrow spaces are beautiful spaces, as we see here on the campus. A sketch of mine showing that interior courtyard where the snow melts and drips into the interior courtyard, and where you get a good amount of sun in the wintertime. That space used. The walkway to the residences, where we use the same wood outside and then enter into each of these apartments, which were variants on a theme. You can see another one of these large pieces of stone, the place where the water drops into the stone, I guess, a garden. The apartment, each apartment had its own character. Bennington has a collection of wonderful prints, and so they used these Albers prints and hand-glazed tile that came from a young artist that makes his tiles outside of, close in Rhode Island, I'm sorry. Another set of the tile, each of the rooms had a different color tile, and each of the tiles came from the same batch, but were naturally differently glazed. Chris Gustafson, the wood cabinets. And then the small room that clearly takes something from the natatorium, for its hatch operates by hand, given that this building has no power or electricity. And then the rain and the sun come into the center, and you have a meeting with the roof hatch closed, or you have a meeting with it open. It's an indoor-outdoor space. The third project now will be the Barnes Foundation. On the left, we have Albert Barnes, his great invention, or purchased invention, Argyrol, which is drops that are put in the eyes of babies. And this man here is John Dewey, who is a philosopher and an educator, and became, and Barnes said, as president of his foundation. The existing Barnes Foundation was in Marion, Pennsylvania. This is a suburb not so dissimilar from this, closer to the center of Philadelphia. And this is the building that Barnes had made, and this is the house that Barnes lived in. It was set in an arboretum. His wife loved gardens, and Barnes loved paintings. His paintings were largely impressionist paintings, and he collected, even though he grew up poor in Philadelphia, when he made his fortune, he collected paintings in droves. And he had a building made by Paul Craig, who was the master of Lou Kahn and who taught at Penn for 25 years. And the building is a neoclassical building made of French limestone. And inside, the paintings are hung in incredible density, so that they're all bilaterally symmetrical. As you can see, hung. Each of these sets is bilaterally hung. And when we see a painting here, it relates to a painting there, or a piece of hardware there to a piece of hardware. It's almost inconceivably dense. And Barnes' idea was that the paintings could be understood without knowing their pedigree. You would appreciate them without having to be educated. And he wanted to use the disposition of the paintings and their relationship to one another, to ordinary piece of furniture, for example, or an ordinary piece of hardware, which he believed were just as much from the hands of artists as the paintings themselves. So when the Barnes began to lose $500,000 a year in the late 90s, people could say, but I don't think it's true, that the trust was able to be broken, and that the city of Philadelphia gave the Barnes a piece of property for $1 and asked that it be moved to Philadelphia. And with that, suddenly the Barnes got $150 million in gifts, because for the first time it would then be open to the public and not just to the private here. For Barnes believed that education should be free to everyone, and it certainly wasn't the case there in Marion. This is the place where Matisse painted his first great mural. He actually painted it twice, because it was first painted for the arches in 3 panels in Paris, brought in, and it didn't fit, so that mural went back and now resides in the Hermitage. The second one fit, and that's the painting that we see here. But over the years, only 3 windows of the original windows for the barns also were allowed to be opened because there was far too much light invasion. So that shades were drawn at virtually all times and only occasional windows were open. And in a way, there was no way to take care of the paintings. There was no, the conservation space was a third the size of the stage and in the basement. So they needed a new home, and we were able to get that commission by this concept, which is that if we built a new home, there should be a gallery in the garden as much as this was a garden in the gallery. And it was in a way to restore the relationship of nature to the idea that Barnes had by having his collection set in a garden with windows to the garden, impressionist paintings, and that it was a way by which one could reunite the relationship of landscape art and architecture. We found in the plan, the original Cray plans, that though we wouldn't change the sequence of rooms, if we took this bearing wall and then pulled the building apart, we could insert a garden into the sequence. In this early sketch, actually, we showed this in our presentation when we met to get the commission. And then a classroom, for Barnes believed in education of people, and there was no chance to really educate in the classrooms, in the galleries that Barnes had left when he died in 1951. This was the concept model we brought to the interview. The building, more or less as it exists today. These are the galleries as they exist. That's the garden that's been inserted, the classroom that's been inserted. Otherwise, the galleries are pure. We were allowed to change the entrance because the building was not accessible to the public, and so we added an elevator and a new stair and made this level with this space. This is a large forecourt, both inside and out, that we devised, but we really entered the building from the outside through nature in an indirect way, much of the work here is in Cranbrook, and walk into the gallery this way. So it's a series of episodes that bring you into the building. The dark toned spaces are the non-public spaces. This is a cafe, which was sorely needed, and today there's a large changing exhibits gallery, for I hope one day they'll be able to bring in paintings that relate to the paintings in the collection, and perhaps even one day take paintings off the wall and be able to relate them to work, contemporary work that's in the changing exhibits gallery. Our plan, just last week or the week before, we were accorded LEED Platinum. This is the first major museum in the country that has been given that. So our idea was to try to make a sustainable building, and I won't go through the plan, but one of the things we did was to make a large fountain plaza that was given to the city of Philadelphia. Another is to preserve this line of London plains that has been there for more than 100 years, and to get people to walk gently into the space, whether they're coming from the north or the south, the east or the west, to be able to get to the building in a comfortable way, and all to enter through under a grove of trees and across the shallow pool. The building, just as it was being completed in the wintertime, is here. It sits in Philadelphia among other limestone buildings. This is the Free Library that was built in 1929. This is the Philadelphia Art Museum down here, the Rodin Museum by Paul Cray, the Franklin Institute here. All of these, and these pylons were all a product of the City Beautiful movement in 1929, but nothing was built, and only on our site was a house of detention for juvenile house of detention, and so that was removed. They received a new home, and what was there was really not only young people who were incarcerated, but a very, very sorry landscape around it. Barnes was one of the very first collectors of African art, not just as anthropological interest, but as real art. And he believed that, again, art came from all cultures and all times. And so it was embedded in his building. And as we proceeded, we too collected African textiles. And we imagined that the facade should be something like a kente cloth, this being a kente cloth. So we made early models of kind of kente cloth. Later found that the stone we would use would not be Indiana limestone, which was far too bland, but we went and eventually found it in Israel in the Negev desert, south of Jerusalem, where we found inexpensive stone that had a very, very rich color to it. And we were able to get it hand-carved then at low cost in Bethlehem. And this was a consortium between Israel and Palestinian workers who brought the stone to us. And it was actually a very happy circumstance, and we were able to go to Bethlehem and talk to them about the way it was best to cut the stone and to dress the stone and how best they could make it. So the facade actually is that kind of cloth of stone, in this case recently wet, where the colors are quite vivid, a little like Bennington. And here they're in super panels that we actually believed would be made off-site and would be brought and set up on the building with small windows. Largely it's a solid facade, but from a distance it too looks white. And there's some elements there are shadow casters and other fins that cast, or bronze fins that cast shadows also on the building and add to the warmth and richness of what is really a very, very simple box. Above all of this is this light box, the top of which is continuous solar panels, and so that light box gives 10% of the power of the building. We're looking at the conservation lab facing northeast and the city of Philadelphia behind. From the parkway, all of the windows that face it are the exact windows in the exact location that were in Paul Cray's building, for those windows were part of his idea of the ensembles, but now using a new glass technology, when the light is right, we can look into the galleries, and so there's no longer shades that close out the relationship of the rooms to the landscape. The long fountain that was the gift to the city of Philadelphia. Walking under red leaf Japanese maples, we enter the building alongside a reflecting pool. Pass into a large portal, and directly ahead of us, water also exists, and then we turn to our right here, walk into the entrance vestibule, and later as we enter the large space, we pass over something that Billy designed using the pattern of a lyre's cloth, another African fabric. So we began to add elements to the building that were elements of the hand and elements of art and elements perhaps that were inspired by African art. This is the mosaic that was built. The cafe, we were able to install this as sound-saving material, sound-absorbent material, and it's a tapestry by our friend Claudia Jungstra. The changing exhibits gallery, where you can look out and catch a glimpse of the water that you walk past. The basic structure is poured-in-place concrete. It is expressed as many times expressed in all of our buildings. In the large light court, this is a spectacular court that's always, the light is always changing. You don't see the sky, but you see this large shadow change. So once again, we're working with the idea of the ceiling as landscape, and the ceiling as the possibility of being a place for the architect to have a presence. The floor is actually the reclaimed structure of the Coney Island boardwalk, so this is all ipe that had been torn down and saved as salvage, and the walls on this interior are the slightly softer stone, slightly more red stone, and once again we're using Claudia's fabrics to absorb sound. This is the drawing that shows us bouncing light in, so that it's both a relatively inexpensive light box at night, giving a glow to the entire box, solar panels on the top, and a very, very passive and inexpensive way to bring the change of light to the interior space. On the roof of the building, we have a model, an abstract model of the building that actually allows the computer to adjust the shading devices on the inside the building, so that if there are considerable passing clouds, the light inside will be adjusted. The space that we left between the two buildings, the hand-chiseled pattern of the Negev stone with Claudia Jungstra's felt fabric below, sort of bringing the light down into the space. We found an artist in Senegal who weaves, and she wove the fabrics for the back of these couches that we had made by Noel. Even from this interior space, we can look inside and see the paintings. So this is a good prelude to what you experience. Here in that inside space, we see a person walking from one gallery to the next, but we can once again see the destination, that is the paintings of Paul Cray, of Dr. Barnes. These spaces are always identified as being contemporary, and we balance the problem of the contemporary and the traditional by the use of wood. A place to sit to look at a small interior garden, the garden that actually passes through the building and exists at the lowest level, a level one entire level below grade. We designed tables for people to sit and read. A place where you can step outside and a fire that can make this into a wonderful space for the evening events. These are doors that were large bronze doors that were simply designed by drawing of the bronze doors using a simple series of discs and rods. And they close off the galleries at night when the galleries are to be closed, but the rest of the building is open. So today we actually can look out into what is a very, very small landscape, but using an idea of a ha-ha. You can have a sense that there's no city beyond, even if it exists right outside your door. So the spaces are now restored. We've changed virtually all of the details. The windows that were white painted metal are now wood. The baseboards here, instead of being porphyry, are wood. We used many of the same ingredients, but adjusted every one. Mostly we adjusted the light. These were, in order to understand how we'd go from traditional wood moldings to contemporary moldings, we had them allow us to make a full-scale mock-up of one of the galleries in a parking lot north of Philadelphia. And there we experimented and built the existing moldings. And there we also tested out our new ideas of moldings that were the precise dimension, because they had to be in order to have the exact relationship to the paintings, for they were part of the idea of the ensembles. And then slowly varied them until we got them just right. They became always more reduced. Our mantra was simplify, intensify. And here we're experimenting with bringing bounced natural light to all of the upper galleries, which had none before. So these are all new inventions for bringing light into the spaces. Here we are in the mock-up here, and here we are in the original space. Stair going down to the lowest level. Here we are actually below grade, where you can step out. There's the library that we've now got, so it's a lending library. There is a wonderful auditorium here and more classrooms and pots that Dr. Barnes had collected that were always down in the basement. So here we have a place to sit and rest before you go into the galleries. And really the service entrance of the building, quite dramatic. Conservation lab, the light box. The next project, and there are two more or three more, I'm going to go quickly, some I know may have to leave, is the Logan Center for the Arts that we just opened this year, this last weekend at the University of Chicago. This is a 7-year project which you won in a competition. University of Chicago is on the other side of the Plaisance. Here it is. A neo-Gothic campus done basically in the 20s and 30s. When we took on this competition, we thought it should be a combination of towers and fields, and that was the idea that we brought to the competition, the towers of Chicago and the fields of the Midwest. And we once went to this idea that we would organize the various program elements, and there were many of them, much as we had lived in Carnegie Hall, as a kind of a tall structure that was stacking a variety of different kinds of programs, so that when you left, let's say, DOVA, which is the Department of Visual Arts, we could walk outside and join with people who had just been in the theater and dance programs. So this is a kind of Tower of the Arts project. And not our first model, but a later model, the low base building with the sawtooth skylights you can see from Carnegie Hall, north facing, on the back side of which are solar panels, once again giving 10% of the power to the building. And so it was a combination of the tower, which spoke to the towers at the University of Chicago, and marked this first real effort for the University of Chicago to expand to the south, and then of a base building, which had working studios, a large loading dock that one could drive into, spaces for making theater elements, black box theater, performance theater, music theater, video room, a film screening room, and performance spaces throughout the building. I'll go quickly through these. It was just open. The plans, a very complex building, 186,000 square feet. The final drawings of the project. We tried to make our first level of all buildings the most important level. You can easily move up one level and easily move down. In this tower, however, though, we wanted to see if we could encourage people to walk up and down through the 175 feet of the height of the building. And we have. We made 2 fire stairs, which are incredibly rich and interesting, and which the students seem to love. And then we under-elevated the building to make sure that it could, that students would want to walk up and down this fire stair, always looking outside to the beautiful landscape, to the Lake Michigan beyond, that they would look down on the rooftop, the green rooftops that we created. They would use courtyards that were above ground that we created, and so on. The tower. Once again, it's made of limestone, but in this case, once again, not Indiana limestone. We instead went to a place in Missouri which had much lower grade limestone at a much lower cost, and we used this stone in a variety of different colors and in long, even bars to make the building so it would relate to the campus, but be different. And then we used a combination of sometimes reflective glass and sometimes clear glass to play a game of hide and seek in a way, so that you would both see and be seen. These really came from the last week. This happens to be the lobby in front of 3 performance spaces. Here we see tile that we've designed, standard tile, and a felt wall that we've designed, not with cloudy, but using a much less expensive technique that we found in China. Stairway going up, actually the same exact stairway used last week as a performance piece. The Black Box Theater, in which anything can happen. The music performance space for 450 people. Excellent for music. Great screening space, but also good for dance, but with no fly. The film screening space. The shop. All skylit. Place where anything can happen. Outdoor spaces is just as important as indoor spaces. This happened to be a fashion show last week. Once again, using this idea of, actually this is actually a bridge that we've made that could turn this into an outdoor theater. And then looking into the skylights above at night, the painting studios, as painting studios looking north are messy as painting studios should be. Kids walking across the bridge, looking down on the little courtyard that's 1 story above grade. And then we also worked with the same felt to create graphics, so as you walked up and down the tower, you would have a sense of where you were. So here we are about to leave the tower, and we know that we're on level 8, but it's a place where we both added a little bit of color and a place for students to wait as they go, let's say, from film to dance. We did this through this artificial felting technique that is largely used on hospitality, for hospitality places, and has never been used, I think, artistically in any way. So we found out about this and then made a whole series of basically wallpaper of felt at quite low cost to designate different areas. And then we took the tile, the heath tile we'd been working with for years, and asked them if we could take a regular piece of tile and then dip it a second time in glaze and see what would happen. And they did. And so we have tile in different places that designates a kind of place where stairs are. This is a view of the fire stair from the outside. The tile that we brought into the fire stair. So you're both looking at the tile pattern that we created in this poured in place stair, and you're also able to look out to the plaisance. And this is a Pope L, an artist who they've now decided to install for the next 3 months, graduates of the University of Chicago, to do installations throughout the building, and it's wonderful. This is a great text piece by Pope L. We have a balcony at the top, which is a balcony that opens up completely and is glazed, but can also be like the Bennington project, a place where you can have a meeting outside overlooking actually the lake. This is a dreary day. And at the very top of the building, a space where you can really, it's a 40-foot tall space where you could get a great jazz combo. The person who gave most of the money to this was very interested in jazz, or you could have a small orchestra, or you could perform dance or film at the top of the building at night. One more project. This is a project in Mumbai, India that started 9 years ago. We still use this pad where people write down what's happening, and it says, Mr. Debashis called regarding project in India for a large company development center. Mr. Ramadorian, down Wednesday, like to set up meeting. I thought it was a joke. But I arrived actually in my shorts the next day, and there were two guys in suits, and they handed me one-page program and said they'd like us to make a campus in India that would be, they would like to start construction in a year. And I sort of laughed at them and said, well, why me? India, as you know, is a place where change is incredible, and the history is everywhere. So this is the Ganesh festival, and this is India today, Mumbai today. Our site that they gave us, and I said, look, I'll come there in a few months. I have to go to Hong Kong, and there's no reason to send me to India to find out about this, but I don't think I should work there because A, I've never been there, and B, I don't know anything about you, and C, I've never designed a campus, or we've never designed a campus. And when we went, we met a guy named Ratan Tata, who is a very, very important man in India, and he was the one that had asked us to do this, and it was he that asked us, and I said, why? He said, look, I know this piece of property very well. There's a lot of green on it, and I grew up spending time in this house on the site, and this house on the site, and I happen to love this site, but my company is doing very well in, and I think that you would respect nature. And I said, that's great. And then he said, in addition, we think you have a sense of the interest in craft, and India is a great place for the crafts. And he said, finally, you don't have a signature like my classmate at Cornell when I studied, Richard Meier, that goes before you. And I said, that's great. I like these. These are good things. So today, this is what the campus looks like. We took on the project, and we've been working on it for 9 years. We still have another 3 or 4 to go, but there are 1,200 people working on it, and we've basically respected everything. We've worked only with Indian materials. We went to quarries to southern India to find the stone. The concrete batching is done on site. People move it by hand. We worked with women's weave to create a new kind of ikat, a single weave ikat, done in small villages in northern India, in order to communicate the way our design should be built, and they would understand it. They said that they would make mock-ups, so we made full-scale mock-ups, this of a corner of the building, and it failed. We made another one. They said, no problem, we'll make another. They made a stairway, and you could see they got the tread to risers completely wrong, and they said, no problem, we'll make another one. So they did it by mock-ups. This is the overall vision of the campus. This much has been built. We said we wanted to make an environmentally friendly campus. There should be no cars on the campus. So you drive up, the Mumbai, as you know, has incredible rain. One day we were there, it rained 37 inches in a single day, and the sun is unbearably hot. So you need cover to get from every single one place to another. So here we've designed a canopy under which cars drive and drop people off, and any cars that are to stay on campus go into the lower level, which is light-filled. We made a roof using the exact system of tile of roofing that was there on the existing buildings, which was that you use a white china tile, broken china pieces, and women from villages spread it out. In this case, we said we needed an extra belt and suspenders because they typically put this on brick-backed construction, and here we put it on a membrane and then allowed them to put the brick-backed construction and then to set their tiles when it's planting time, the women leave. But as you leave the garage, you look up, and the soffit, or the ceiling, once again, has a kind of sense of quality to it. So we show you a few little images of the campus, which is still under construction. Our idea of entering, you enter by a pool, you ascend stairs, and you walk under a tile-covered bridge to the different buildings. The large stone panels, this is obviously not finished state. We traveled to northwestern India, to Rajasthan, to see how jollies were made, and that they were still made at cost-effective way. And so we have large jolly screens made of dolper stone, which are now started by CNC and then finished by hand, where you can carve the stone. This is a single panel with a pattern existing on both sides. Created patterns for the walkways that would allow the breezes from the west, the monsoon breezes, to come through and accelerate out, but the rain and the sun not to hit them. So this is about a month or so ago. looking out into the landscape. The passages, we tried to say as little should be air conditioned as possible. And the moment you step out of your air conditioned spaces, and they do programming for people throughout the world. In fact, the company now has grown to 250,000 people. You would step out onto walkways that were connected to nature so that breezes would pass through these spaces, and we would once again use outside wood from go-downs or mill buildings that were there. We found a way to make copper candles of hammered copper, because that's a very easy material to work in India, and then put lights in them so people could sit outside during the day and the evening. And then we used the idea of step wells, which is to build into the earth to make cooler spaces, and then we did that, made sure the sun never ever comes into the spaces which have large areas of glazing. So we thought these people are working on computers. We don't want them not to look outside. They must not be shades in the windows. So we need to shade every window. Drawings of passages between buildings, all stairs, fire stairs. So this is a passage between the buildings. We'll one day have vines on it. You can see the shades over the windows make sure that the sun never comes into any spaces where the people work, but they can always look into nature. I had the idea that everyone who's working there should have a pool, and they bought the idea. And so have once again made a pool. It's not finished at this point, but it's a stone-lined pool, and it has a giant slot in it for the monsoon to thunder into the pool when it rains, but you to be sheltered from the sun. And then these vent holes, which we'd learned about here in Cranbrook, actually accelerate and allow the spaces outside to be cool. So I'm here in a workstation with a lot of glass looking out into an interior courtyard, and the breezes are always convecting through and up through this space. The mold for the oculus, and here in this case we were actually on an upper level looking at the outside of this tube that runs through the space. And we can see the ikat tapestries that give color to the workstations. The final project is only a few slides, and this last summer we were asked to do a project for the Venice Biennale. David Chipperfield from England asked us, and we were one of a number of people to do this. And the project could be anything. His theme was common ground, and you all know Venice, but you don't know the Arsenale, which is where they basically built ships and weapons destruction, and they had an amazing navy, but the navy is really nothing anymore, and these spaces are used for the art and the architecture Biennale, which has become quite grand. We chose a space which was not in the Arsenale itself, but really at the far end. It's called the Giardini della Vergini, or the Garden of the Virgins. And here, this little building called Casa Scaffali was the farthest from the center, and we loved it. I thought it would be a great place for our project. For common ground to us was an idea of making boxes and sending them to friends that we knew and saying, fill this not with architecture, but fill us with things that touch you and affect you and show us something about your lives. So I returned to Carnegie Hall and the idea that objects identify who we are and that we're attracted to objects. And maybe our DNA can be read through the things we collect. So 34 boxes went throughout the world and went to friends, and this was in late August, the Casa Scaffali as we found it. This is its view on the outside. It was used in the Navy's yard for storage of seeds, actually, because there were gardens there. This was rather overgrown. It had been used once for the Art Biennale. We had these boxes made with every single person's name put on the edge. They were identical boxes, almost Donald Judd-like. And they then would be shipped from Paterson, New Jersey to our friends. The friends would then fill them and send them to Venice. We would open up the boxes and then create a kind of Wunderkammer, a display of what we found in the boxes. So we arrived in Venice in late August, and here the boxes were ready being opened, and we set them out on the ground and had found this incredible wonderment of riches that our friends had sent. Peter Zumthor sent pigments that he wanted set on the top of his box. You can see that we had signed each of the boxes, and they had received a good deal of scuff marks through the travel. Francis Carré from Burkina Faso sent earth from his village, and a mallet where women pound that earth to make earthen floors in their villages. Tom Main sent, as he called it, a gold brick, a very, very complex three-dimensional sculpture that just perfectly fit into the box. Juhani Pallasmaa, who is part of our DNA, for he created the entrance arrival element, sent not only his passport but a round of finished bread, film. He's fascinated with Tchaikovsky and books that he's read and written. So Scofidio and Diller, X-rays of objects, and Scofidio, Diller, and Renfro. Toyo Ito sent rocks from that village in Japan that was destroyed by the tsunami. Words of expression and loss by people who were there. Ursula von Rodigsvard made a sculpture that fit perfectly into the box, made of cedar, as she does, kind of burnt cedar. Bijoy Jain from Mumbai actually cast small models in bronze and sent them, along with photographs and actually a film depicting life in India. Claudia Jungstra, who I mentioned, has her own sheep, and she makes her own herbs, or grows her own herbs, and then uses the herb dyes to create the colors for her yarns. And she sent something that she called Adoring Rumpelstiltskin, 250 balls of yarn that tumbled out of the box. And then we set it up in 5 days on the shelves, always using the boxes and always using the contents, and it became a fantastic sort of phantasmal gloria of life, and it's there today and will last through November. So here we were just being curators, but we were curating the objects of our friends, and strangely enough, people are really willing to make a huge effort. Richard Meier, for example, cut up folders and catalogs in his office, had someone do this, and created a kind of Kurt Schwitters, because he loves his collages. Tony Ames did a tableau here. O'Donnell and Toomey sent the chair they paint on in the summertime and objects from their collection. Glenn Murcutt, objects that he owns and loves. So it was a great event. This is Glenn's side through here. This is Brad Klopfel. Marlon Blackwell, you know this. We even had our son send in something. He took the box and cut it up and made it a very, very small box in which he put an 8-ball. So not everyone treated it just the way we expected, but everyone did, in fact, treat it just the way we wanted. So I end with these hands, and they're the hands of the maker. And I say architecture, sure, may still be about the computer, and forever more we will do things that are digitally fabricated and presumably digitally driven, but it's actually the hands that make the work, and it's the hands that will continue to make the work, and it's the hands that hold the hope. Thank you. So, thank you. It was great.